Welcome back to Pathfinders, a podcast series from RBC Capital Markets where we explore the fast-moving world of biotech and pharma. In this episode, we're taking a snapshot of U.S. healthcare policy and looking at what might develop in the run-up to the midterm elections. You'll hear a panel from RBC's Global Healthcare Conference featuring Hunter Hammond and Will Humphrey, both from the Capstone Strategy Group. They'll share their insights and predictions around healthcare policy for the elections this fall. Now, let's dive into the conversation.
I think you're going to see the administration continue to play the hits and really try and highlight some of the winning policies that they've succeeded in passing or enacting in the first year. Most notably, I think you're going to see a continued focus on the war on fraud or the crackdown on waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare and Medicaid. That has allowed the Republican Party to more effectively message the healthcare policies that they've really been on their back foot for. And that's cuts to Medicaid through OBA. That is the expiration of the ACA subsidies. That is immigration enforcement in blue cities. Same time, you'll also see the administration push for additional most favored nation voluntary drug pricing deals. I'm sure the administration is still trying to get most favored nation drug pricing codified, although nobody's really clear what codification would even look like, and the likelihood is very, very slim. But playing the hits is what I expect.
Pivoting to the FDA for a moment, there's obviously been a lot of turmoil at the agency. Acting commissioner now is currently Kyle Diamantis. What does this say about the administration's priorities? What would we look for in a new commissioner, and what do we know about Kyle?
Yeah, it says it's an administration that's looking for stability in the FDA. Ultimately, the White House viewed McCarry's tenure and that of his allies as a distraction to some of those winning policies. The political intervention in the drug approval process, specifically around vaccines and rare disease medications, distracted and generated a lot of negative headlines, pulling attention away from the Trump RX initiative and most favored nation drug pricing agreements. So, in McCarry's stead, you have Kyle No Drama Diamantis, and that's what the administration is looking for. They often say that the F in FDA is silent, but I think this is another signal that the White House is looking for a messenger who keeps his head low and plays the hits. Initiatives like food safety and nutrition are extremely positive, and they're much easier to message relative to a reconstituted ACIP, vaccine policy changes, treatments for autism, etc.
The administration has also introduced, and under the former commissioner as well, a number of new programs and initiatives to accelerate drug development. We had the commissioner priority review voucher, the paper outlaying a single pivotal trial standard. To what extent do you think these changes can actually drive a real world impact?
I don't view any of these initiatives as truly transformative independently, but together, I think they matter for two reasons. One, for drug makers who are able to position themselves to capture some of the upside, I really do think there could be a benefit in terms of either getting to major decision points more quickly or lowering the cost or time of clinical development. It also matters because it's a directional signal that the FDA is looking to modernize. They are making an effort to reduce OpEx as it relates to R&D. They want to see meaningful changes that improve the drug development process. And I think that you're going to see a lot of these initiatives retained by the agency, but it is unclear at this point to what extent they will continue to push the envelope forward under new leadership.
Now, drug developers are sourcing candidates from China for early trials. How does the administration view this? Is this something that's going to change?
There's tension between an administration that has really built its brand on being tough on China, whereas you have the engine of American pharmaceutical industry finding this cornucopia of low cost development candidates in China, and in licensing has exploded as a practice. There's a lot of concern as to whether or not the administration might step in and block that practice. At this point, I think that's extremely unlikely. I think rather than using a legislative or regulatory cudgel to try and block in licensing, you're more likely to see continued efforts to incentivize onshoring of early stage clinical development.
Can I add something there too? I think pharma as a lobby probably has a lot of work to do on educating policymakers on the global supply chain of pharmaceuticals. Like if I think back to semiconductors, we had Huawei rip and replace. A couple of years go by, Chris Miller writes Chip War, and all around DC, I feel like people read that book, really understand the vulnerability of the semiconductor supply chain. You get the Chips and Sciences Act, you get export controls. I think there's that education gap where if you ask your average member of Congress, they can at least articulate here's the importance of Taiwan and semiconductors. I don't think we're anywhere near there on biopharma. And so there's still, I think, some education to be done before you potentially get something like full subsidization for onshoring, friendshoring.
And then MFN, certainly a big topic come the end of last year.
Yep.
Where are we now and what's the next steps?
Yeah, so the president sent out 17 letters to 17 manufacturers. He has 17 deals, which he's proud of. I think most of those companies have signaled that by signing those agreements, they exempt themselves from the two mandatory models, GUARD in Part D, GLOBE in Part B. They'll participate voluntarily in Generous, which is Medicaid. Now we have the 100% tariffs that have been announced end of July for large companies, mainly the ones that have struck agreements, and end of September, I believe, for the small ones. And so I think what that is meant to signal is he'd like more deals with more companies. Unfortunately, I guess for the administration, they haven't finalized either the GUARD model or the GLOBE model. And there are some pieces in there that I think, well, I know industry has advocated quite strongly need to be changed. The biggest one is the licensing agreements. Like if we look at some of these prices, you're a US company, you have control over your US price, but you don't have control over your European price for the same drug. And so you have no ability to raise ex-US price to offset some of these hits. That being said, we conducted analysis. If you exclude all of the drugs that are excluded in the GUARD model, you get to around 8% of Part D spend that would be exposed. And then only a quarter of Part D beneficiaries will actually participate in the model. So we're talking about 2% of Part D spend. So the models obviously are scary. The idea of external reference pricing quite bad, but the nominal exposure is actually quite low. And so I think if you see deals at all going forward, it'll be smaller companies that are exposed, one drug, two drugs, big discrepancy with the inability to change price in Europe.
And I'm getting a few more questions on if this could get codified, like legislatively. What are your thoughts about that?
In theory, your progressive Democrats should be loving this and should be holding hands with the president to codify it. I don't think you'll see that anytime soon. The next battle, assuming they finalize these models, I think are going to be in the courts. Like this type of expansion of the innovation center within CMS, their authority to do this is going to be challenged on constitutional grounds. And I think if the industry wins that lawsuit, then these are off the table. You got to go back to Congress, try to figure something out. If the government wins, it really codifies, at least in the courts, CMMI's authority to do some of these expansive models.
Got it. And then finally, from the drug pricing side of things, GLP-1, we recently saw the bridge model just get expanded, the balance model delayed. Does that tell us anything about the confidence of the administration in that model? And what's the investment implications for that?
Yeah, obviously the plans looked at balance and collectively decided to pass. And CMS stepped in and decided to uphold their end of the bargain with Lilly and Novo. For Lilly and Novo, this is positive. You are able to retain the increase in access that you were promised in exchange for the meaningful pricing concessions that you offered as part of your voluntary MFN agreement. It is a really interesting model, bridge. CMS owns all of the risk, and it actually, in many ways, is bringing us somewhat closer to a European HTA style model where CMS is paying for a negotiated price for a drug. That opens the door to an edge case that I don't think is likely. I think there's a lot of uniquities around GLP-1s. One, that Medicare hadn't covered them previously for weight loss. And two, we've really never seen a drug that is as popular in the collective social imagination. But it does raise the specter for a similar blockbuster launch in the future, or a future administration to step in and negotiate a price, disintermediate the insurers and PBMs from Part D, and own the risk and bear that themselves moving forward.
As we sort of look into midterms and you think about different potential outcomes, red sweep, blue sweep, house flips, are there winners and losers, industries that might be potentially better or worse off under different scenarios if you think about sort of the last 2 years of the Trump administration?
I think unless you get the Republican maintenance of both the House and the Senate, and even then, I think the idea of doing another large reconciliation bill is probably unlikely. If I think about policy, it's really the legislation that's the most durable, that creates the most long-term risk to value. That being said, in the event that Democrats take really either chamber, I think they're going to be able to cause a lot of difficulty for this administration. Their subpoena power, their ability to call officials before them.
What happens if you see a Democratic House or a Democratic Congress? I think the biggest winner automatically is the hospitals. Scrutiny of hospitals has been increasing substantially, and you have two champions for them in Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. Schumer himself has been very clear that he will not entertain anything that even smells like additional cuts to hospitals. So that matters for 340B reform, that matters for legislative site neutral policies, and the Democrats on bloc will likely also seek to reintroduce the ACA subsidies.
What's the future of the 340B program from here?
Yeah. I mean, it seems like scrutiny of the program is at an all-time high. You've got pharma running a full court press as the latest healthcare affordability boogeyman. And if you ever spend time in Washington, every bus stop, every metro stop, there are 340B is why your drugs are expensive ads everywhere. That's going to continue. The industry is seeking to educate lawmakers on the program. Influential Republican think tanks like the Paragon Institute are advocating for program reform. You've got the Wall Street Journal's op-eds describing the 340B program as grift. And despite all of this, I still think the likelihood for any sort of meaningful reform is very unlikely. Yes, the administration is seeking to reintroduce the rebate pilot program, but that's really seeking to address an IRA issue, not institute meaningful 340B reforms in and of itself. If you're a lawmaker, you see the 340B program as a net $60 billion plus subsidy to the hospitals that costs the federal government nothing. If you want to open that up and change that program, you are going to have to risk stepping in and backfilling that funding through something that costs the government money. Not only that, but you're going to have an army of pharma and hospital lobbyists beating down your door. And that matters. That tension is going to result in the program staying static for now.
Appreciate all the perspective and joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Pathfinders in Biopharma, brought to you by RBC Capital Markets. Please remember to subscribe to get more great content and be alerted about future episodes. This episode was recorded on May 19th, 2026. If you'd like to learn more or continue the conversation, please visit rbccm.com/biopharma. See you all next time.
This content is based on information available at the time it was recorded and is for informational purposes only. It is not an offer to buy or sell or a solicitation, and no recommendations are implied. It is outside the scope of this communication to consider whether it is suitable for you and your financial objectives.